legend stories, but these stories hit different, especially the last one. So watch till the end, subscribe, and let's start. I remember the first time I saw him. It was a regular Tuesday evening, and I was walking home from my friend's house. The sun had just set, leaving an orange glow in the sky. As I turned the corner of my street, I felt a chill run down my spine. I looked around, but there was nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual houses, cars, and trees. Then I saw him. Standing under the streetlight not too far away was a man. He was tall, with a thin frame, and wore a black suit that seemed too big for him. But it wasn't his clothes that caught my attention. It was his face. He had the most disturbing smile I had ever seen. It stretched from ear to ear as if someone had carved it into his flesh. His eyes were wide open, staring straight at me, unblinking. I felt my heart race. Who are you? I whispered, but he didn't reply. He just stood there, smiling. I quickly walked past him, trying to ignore the feeling of his eyes on my back. When I got home, I locked the door and peeked out the window. He was gone. Over the next few days, I tried to forget about the man, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But then I started seeing him more often. At the grocery store, in the park, even outside my school, always with that same eerie smile. One day I was talking to my friend Sarah about it. "There's this man," I said. "He keeps following me, and he has this terrifying smile. It's like he's always watching me." Sarah looked concerned. "That's really creepy. Maybe you should tell your parents or the police." "I don't know," I replied. "He hasn't done anything, just stares at me. Maybe I'm overreacting." A few nights later, I was in my room, trying to sleep. I kept thinking about the smiling man, wondering who he was and why he was following me. Suddenly, I heard a noise outside my window. I got up and pulled the curtains aside. There he was, standing in my yard, his face illuminated by the moonlight. I felt my blood run cold. I rushed to my parents' room. "Mom, Dad, there's a man outside my window," I shouted. They quickly got up and followed me back to my room. But when we looked outside, he was gone. My dad checked the yard and found nothing. The next day, I decided to do some research. I went to the library and looked up any information about a man with a grotesque smile. I found an old newspaper article about an urban legend called the Smiling Man. According to the story, he was once a cruel man who committed horrible crimes. One day, he was cursed with eternal madness and a smile that could never fade. He was doomed to wander, spreading fear wherever he went. I felt a chill. Could it be that the man following me was the smiling man from the legend? I didn't want to believe it, but everything seemed to fit. That evening, I was home alone, doing my homework. The house was quiet, and I tried to focus on my studies. Suddenly, the lights started flickering. I heard a soft laugh behind me. My heart pounded as I turned around. The smiling man was standing in the doorway, his smile wider than ever. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward. I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get out, but the only way was past him. Summoning all my courage, I dashed towards the door. He reached out to grab me, but I managed to slip past him. I ran out of the house, not stopping until I was at Sarah's place. I told her everything, and she let me stay the night. The next day, I went to the police. They listened to my story, but without any evidence, there was little they could do. "We'll keep an eye out," they said, "but you need to be careful." That evening, I decided to stay at Sarah's house. We were watching TV, trying to keep our minds off the situation. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Sarah's parents were out, so we were alone. Who could it be? Sarah wondered. I felt a sense of dread. "Don't open it," I whispered. But Sarah, trying to be brave, approached the door. "Who's there?" she called out. No answer. She slowly opened the door, and there he was, standing on the porch with that horrific smile. Sarah screamed and slammed the door shut. "He's here," she cried. We ran upstairs and locked ourselves in her room. We could hear his footsteps in the hallway, getting closer and closer. I felt tears streaming down my face. "What does he want?" I whispered. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the footsteps stopped. We waited in tense silence, but there was nothing. When we finally gathered the courage to check, he was gone. The next few days were a blur. I was terrified, always looking over my shoulder, expecting to see that smile. But he didn't show up. Maybe he had finally left me alone. One night I was lying in bed, trying to sleep. I heard a soft whisper, "I will always find you." I bolted up, but there was no one there. My room was empty. The next morning, I decided to leave town. I couldn't live in fear anymore. I packed my bags and said goodbye to my friends and family. As I boarded the bus, I felt a sense of relief. Maybe this was the end. But as the bus pulled away, I looked out the window. Standing at the bus stop with that same terrifying smile was the smiling man. He raised a hand in a mock wave. I felt my heart sink. This wasn't over. I moved to a new city, hoping to start fresh. For a while, things were normal. I made new friends and started a new life, but I never felt completely safe. Every now and then, I would see a glimpse of him in a crowd, or or feel his eyes on me when I was alone. One day, I was at a cafe with my new friend, Emily. We were chatting and laughing when suddenly I saw him sitting at a table across the room. My blood ran cold. "Emily, we need to leave," I said urgently. "What's wrong?" she asked, confused. "He's here," I whispered. "The smiling man." Emily looked around but didn't see him. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes, I'm sure," I replied, my voice shaking. We quickly left the cafe and walked down the street. I was looking, but he wasn't following us. Maybe I had imagined it. That night, I had a nightmare. I was trapped in a dark room with no way out. The smiling man was there, his face illuminated by a single flickering light. He didn't say anything, just watched me with that grotesque smile. I woke up, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to find a way to stop him. I went back to the library and did more research. I found an old book about curses and how to break them. It mentioned that sometimes confronting the source of the curse could lift it. I decided to face him. I knew it was risky, but I had no other choice. I went to the place where I first saw him, hoping he would be there. As I approached the streetlight, I felt a chill. He was there, waiting for me. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. His smile widened. "You can't escape me," he whispered. "I am a part of you now." I felt a surge of anger. "No, you're not," I shouted. "I won't let you control my life anymore." He took a step closer, and I felt a strange sensation, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. The smile on his face started to fade, and for a moment I saw a look of fear in his eyes. Suddenly he vanished, like a puff of smoke. I stood there, stunned. Was it over? Had I really defeated him? I went home, feeling a mix of relief and disbelief. I didn't see him again for a long time. Life slowly returned to normal, and I started to feel safe again. But deep down, I knew he was still out there somewhere. The smiling man might be gone, but the memory of his grotesque smile would haunt me forever. Years later, I was at a reunion with my old friends. We were reminiscing about the past, and I told them about my encounter with the smiling man. They listened, wide-eyed, as I recounted the terrifying events. "Do you think he's still out there?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, "but I hope not." As the night went on, I felt a sense of closure. Talking about it had helped me process what had happened. Maybe it was finally time to move on. But as I walked home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing under the streetlight with a familiar smile on his face. I blinked, and he was gone. Maybe it was just my imagination. Or maybe he was still out there, waiting for the right moment to return. I took a deep breath and walked home. I would truly be free from the smiling man's curse. But for now, I had to live with the knowledge that he could be anywhere, watching, with that terrifying smile. When we first moved into the house, I didn't think anything was wrong. It was old, a bit dusty, but seemed perfect for our family. My mom loved the big garden, my dad was excited about the large garage, and my little sister, Emma, found a swing in the backyard she immediately claimed as her own. Everything was going great until the whispers started. I remember the first night clearly. I was lying in bed, almost asleep, when I heard it, a faint, soft whisper. It was so quiet, I thought I was dreaming, but then it happened again. "Leave," it said. My eyes flew open, and I sat up, looking around my room. "Who's there?" I whispered back, my voice shaking. No answer, just silence. The next day, I asked my mom if she heard anything strange last night. She just laughed and ruffled my hair. "You probably just heard the wind, sweetheart," she said. But I knew it wasn't the wind. It was a voice. I decided not to tell anyone else, thinking they'd laugh at me too. A few days passed, and the whispers didn't come back. I started to think maybe my mom was right. Maybe it was just my imagination. But then one night, I heard it again. This time it was clearer, more urgent. "Get out," it said. My heart raced. I threw my blanket over my head, trying to block out the sound, but it didn't help. The whispering continued. "You're in danger." The next morning, I noticed Emma acting weird. She was usually so happy and playful, but today she seemed scared. She clung to my mom, refusing to go near her swing. "Emma, what's wrong?" I asked, kneeling down to her level. She looked at me with big, scared eyes. "The walls," she whispered. "They talked to me." I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't the only one hearing the whispers. I hugged Emma, trying to comfort her. "It's okay," I said, even though I didn't believe it myself. "We'll figure this out." That night, I decided to stay awake and listen. If the walls were talking, I wanted to hear what they had to say. I sat on my bed, staring at the walls, waiting. It was quiet at first, but then, just past midnight, the whispers started again. "Leave, now," they said. I felt a cold sweat on my forehead. "Why?" I whispered back. There was a pause, and then danger, death. I ran to my parents' room, shaking them awake. "The walls are whispering," I shouted. "We need to leave." My dad groaned and sat up. "What are you talking about?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. I tried to explain, but he just shook his head. "It's just a bad dream." go back to bed, but it wasn't a dream. The whispers were real. The next day, I decided to do some investigating. I went to the local library and asked the librarian if she knew anything about our house. She gave me a strange look, but then led me to a dusty old book about the town's history. Flipping through the pages, I found a section about our house. It used to belong to a family named the Millers. They had disappeared mysteriously years ago, and no one knew what happened to them. As I read more, I found out that they had a dark reputation. People said it was haunted. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the Millers. What happened to them? Why were the walls whispering? I decided to stay up and listen again. This time I recorded the whispers on my phone. When I played it back, my heart skipped a beat. The whispers were clear and unmistakable. Leave or die. I showed the recording to my parents the next morning. My mom looked worried, and my dad finally seemed to believe me. "We need to get out of here," he said, packing our bags. But as we were about to leave, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Too late," they said. "They're here." Suddenly, the walls seemed to close in on us. Emma screamed, and I grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the door. But the door wouldn't budge. It was like something was holding it shut. My dad threw himself against it, trying to break it down, but it was no use. We were trapped. The whispers turned into screams. "Help us," they cried. "Don't let them get you." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and turned to see a pale figure standing behind me. It was a woman, her eyes wide with terror. "Save your family," she whispered, and then she was gone. I didn't know what to do. We were surrounded by the ghosts of the Millers, all begging for help. I remembered the book I read at the library. The Millers had tried to uncover the house's dark secrets and had paid the price. I knew we had to find out what happened to them if we wanted to escape. I ran to the basement where the whispers were the loudest. My parents and Emma followed, their faces pale with fear. In the corner of the basement, we found an old, dusty chest. Inside were old photographs, letters, and a diary. The diary belonged to Mrs. Miller. It told the story of how they discovered the house was built on an ancient burial ground. The spirits were angry and vengeful, trapping anyone who lived there. "We need to perform a cleansing ritual," my mom said, her voice shaking. "It's the only way to appease the spirits." She had read about such rituals in one of her old books. We gathered candles, sage, and holy water, and my mom led us in the ritual. As we chanted, the whispers grew louder, more agitated. "Leave now," they screamed. "You can't stop them." Just as we finished the ritual, the ground beneath us started to shake. The walls seemed to close in, and we could hear the anguished cries of the trapped spirits. "Hurry," my dad shouted. "We need to get out now." We raced upstairs, but the door was still stuck. In a last-ditch effort, my dad grabbed a heavy chair and smashed it against the door. It finally gave way, and we stumbled outside, gasping for breath. As we ran from the house, I turned back to see the walls of the house shifting, almost as if they were alive. The whispers had turned into anguished wails, and I knew we had barely escaped with our lives. We never went back to that house. My parents sold it as quickly as they could, and we moved far away. But sometimes late at night, I still hear the whispers in my dreams. "You're in danger," they say. "Don't come back," and I never will. Have you ever heard of the Midnight Slayer? People in our city talk about him like he's some ghost story, but he's real. He kills at midnight, always at midnight. The police have tried to catch him, but he's always one step ahead. My name is Alex, and I'm a journalist. I decided to investigate these murders because I thought I could do what the police couldn't. It all started when I got a strange letter at my office. The envelope had no return address, just my name written in neat, black letters. Inside there was a note: "If you want to know the truth, meet me at the old park at midnight, MS." My heart pounded in my chest. Was this from the Midnight Slayer himself? I didn't know, but I had to find out. I decided to go to the park. It was a cold, dark night. The wind howled through the trees, making eerie sounds. I felt like someone was watching me, but I couldn't see anyone. Then I heard a voice, a whisper. "Over here." I turned and saw a shadowy figure. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to walk towards him. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to sound brave. The figure stepped into the dim light of a street lamp. He was tall and wore a black coat. His face was hidden in the shadows. "I'm the one you're looking for," he said. "I'm the Midnight Slayer." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice shaking. He laughed, a cold, menacing sound. "Because it's fun," he said. "But you're not here to talk about me. You're here because you want to stop me." I nodded, unable to speak. "I'll give you a chance," he said. "Every night, I will send you a clue. If you can solve it before midnight, I'll spare a life. If you can't, well, you know what happens." I knew I should run, call the police, do something, but I was frozen in place. He handed me a piece of paper and disappeared into the darkness. The first clue was a riddle. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with wind. I thought hard and realized the answer was an echo. I quickly went to Echo Street, hoping to find something. There I found another note taped to a lamppost. Good job, Alex. Tomorrow's clue will be harder. Be ready. This terrifying game continued for days. Each night, I received a new clue, and each clue led me closer to the Midnight Slayer. I felt like I was always just a step behind him. The pressure was getting to me. I barely slept, barely ate. My mind was always racing, trying to stay one step ahead. One night, the clue was particularly difficult. It was a cryptic message about stars and time. I struggled to solve it, and midnight was approaching fast. I was running out of time. Suddenly it hit me. The answer was the old observatory on Hill Street. I raced there as fast as I could. When I arrived, it was eerily quiet. I crept inside, my heart pounding. I heard footsteps and turned around. There he was, the Midnight Slayer, standing in the shadows. He clapped slowly, a mocking smile on his face. "Well done, Alex," he said. "But tonight, you're too late." My heart sank. I knew what that meant. Somewhere someone was dying because I hadn't solved the clue in time. The guilt was overwhelming. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "Why are you doing this?" I cried. "Why me?" He stepped closer, his eyes cold and lifeless. "Because you're interesting, Alex. You have the mind for this. You make it fun for me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was killing people for fun, and he thought this was some kind of game. I knew I had to stop him, but how? He was always ahead of me. The next night, I received another clue. This one was different. It wasn't a riddle, but a series of numbers. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. Then, it clicked. It was a phone number. I dialed it, and a voice on the other end answered. "Alex, you're getting close." "Who is this?" I demanded. "You know who this is," the voice said. "But do you know where I am?" I thought hard. The phone number's area code was from an abandoned part of the city. I raced there, hoping to catch him. The old warehouse district was dark and deserted. I felt like I was walking into a trap, but I had no choice. Inside one of the warehouses, I found another note. "Almost there, Alex. But are you ready for the truth?" My heart pounded as I moved deeper into the warehouse. Suddenly, I heard a scream. I ran towards the sound and found a woman tied to a chair. She was crying, terrified. I quickly untied her, and she hugged me, sobbing. "He's here," she whispered. "He's watching us." I looked around, but I couldn't see anyone. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to stay calm. We started to leave when suddenly, the lights went out. We were plunged into darkness. I heard footsteps getting closer. "Run!" I shouted. We stumbled through the dark, trying to find a way out. The footsteps were right behind us. I could feel his presence, like a cold hand on my shoulder. We finally burst out of the warehouse and into the night. We didn't stop running until we were far away. The police took the woman to safety and promised to increase their efforts to catch the Midnight Slayer. But I knew it wasn't enough. He was still out there, and he wouldn't stop until he was caught. The next night, I received another clue. This one was the hardest yet. It was a puzzle, with pieces that needed to be arranged in a specific order. I worked on it for hours, my mind racing. Midnight was approaching, and I was running out of time. I solved it. The answer was the oak there. I rushed there, my heart pounding. The cemetery was dark and silent. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. I felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't see anyone. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my shoulder. I turned around and saw the Midnight Slayer, his eyes cold and cruel. "You've done well, Alex," he said, "but this is the end." He raised a knife, and I braced myself for the worst. But then I heard a voice. "Drop the knife." It was the police. They had finally caught up to him. He tried to run, but they were too quick. They tackled him to the ground and arrested him. As they led him away, he looked at me and smiled. "This isn't over, Alex," he said. "I'll be back." I watched as they took him away, my heart finally starting to slow down. The nightmare was over. The Midnight Slayer was caught, and the city was safe. But his words haunted me. Was this really the end, or was there more to come? I went home that night, exhausted but relieved. I knew I had done my best, and I had helped catch a killer. But I also knew that the memory of the Midnight Slayer would stay with me forever. The fear, the suspense, the terror, it would never truly go away. The next day, I received another letter. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, there was a single piece of paper with one word, "soon." My heart pounded. Was he still out there? Or was this just a cruel joke? I didn't know. But one thing was for sure. I would never forget the midnight murders. And I would always be ready, just in case he ever came back. Like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.